Go for it.
Hi there. So today we're going to open the show. We're going to be talking about the idea that knowledge is power. It's something that I'm sure that all of
Hi
us
there.
grew up
So
here.
today we're going to open the show. We're going to be talking.
We're going to be talking about the idea that knowledge is power. I'm sure that we all grew up hearing that truism and well, I say truism or that idea. And so tonight we're going to discuss that a little bit. I've been having some thoughts about it recently in developing that out with some of the things that have been going on in our world and going on in the country, and some ideas that kind of seem to surround the way that our culture and politics are being talked about right now. It's just an interesting idea for me to work on, and I think that Terry and I had a little bit of a dialogue about it and discussed it prior to the show, and I think we've got a good base to start with here. So I figured I'll start it out with just the question itself and ask, do you think that knowledge is power? And then we'll go from there. You guys.
Well, I'll say something. Just a quick comment. To me, that's an extremely broad statement, because what kind of knowledge? Any knowledge, knowledge about certain things. It really can open a huge discussion. So that'll be my opening comment.
Well, earlier when Steve and I were tossing the idea around, like I mentioned just before the show, and I apologize once again for being a little late to the table here, but we were looking at the idea, some of the ideas that span the entire culture. Among those, those of us who are old enough. And Steve's kind of right about the cutoff point here, but we can remember a world where if I wanted to learn a subject when I was young, for instance, I would go to a library and I would check out books in my name, and depending on the library, I was only allowed a limited number of books, typically 2. So then I had this, this ominous responsibility to take these books, digest them, bring them back in good condition, or I was in a lot of trouble. I was surrounded by people that could get me in a lot of trouble back in those days. So I would go, that's how I would, so most of what I took in, as I grew up rather, well, things got better as I got older, but I grew up in poverty, and my parents gradually worked their way out of it. So we didn't buy a lot of stuff. So the use of the public library was important. There was no internet. I mean, there wasn't even a dream of an internet that people have today to access information. So it was a very tactile, very deliberate thing if you wanted to acquire knowledge. So it's not the sort of work that people would probably want to go through today, since we do have the internet. But we were discussing, and I'll just say it briefly, and then I'll turn it back over here, that this has gone through phases. First, we have the internet. And I mentioned to Steve, because I remember the number, because when I first got to the property that we're on, and I have predominantly sugar maples here, and I knew a little bit about harvesting maple syrup, but it's never something that I was able to do. So I thought I'd pull it up, and I still remember, I can't remember exactly what I asked of Google, but I remember that I got 117,000 responses on maple syrup harvesting in 0.24 seconds or something like that. And I went, oh, that's going to make for a lot of reading. Now, obviously, some of them were more pertinent to my situation than others, but such a phenomenal amount of information at my fingertips. I mean, too much. Unfortunately, they tried to funnel the things that were more pertinent, and I did obviously go on and harvest maple syrup, something that people did without the internet or books for many years. But there seems to have been another turning in the how we handle knowledge now. So the same Google for instance, that I was once able to find 117,000 responses in less than a quarter second for a single subject can sometimes make information almost impossible to find, which seems somewhat odd. So I would say from that, that yes, there's power in the allowance of such information to pass. There's also great power in the holding back of such information for whatever purposes are intents those that limit that information have. I'll leave it with that.
Well, to just give a little bit of a kind of background on this, it's just something that recently I kind of noticed it. I was walking through and my son was watching something on YouTube, and he watches a show called Brain Games, and I don't remember if it was the show itself, but there was an image up there. I think it was like next videos or something like that, where it puts up the next videos, and one of them set, because it feeds you into something else that's similar to what you're watching, and there was on the screen it said knowledge is power, and it just kind of triggered in my mind and made me think about it, and then because it kind of unsettled me, for some reason I couldn't pick up on, because it's something I've heard a billion times in my life. It's not like it's a jarring statement, it's just something we accept as a truism, but it gave me a little bit of an unsettled feeling, and I started trying to put my finger on what it was about it that kind of was bothering me, and then over the last few days I've been seeing things in the news, just like everybody else does. We see things that are happening in the world and happening in the country, and one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that people in general discourse in the media and in especially in the big media, the big corporate media, ABC, NBC, CB, CN or MSNBC, CNN, all the big networks, Fox, any of them really. But they talk about power quite a bit, and especially in the political realm, we talk about power and how it's wielded and how it's effectively used, and whether or not it's even good to have. And we generally talk about it in a kind of a negative connotation, especially nowadays. It just seems like when it's said, just the idea of having power seems to be said kind of negatively. Power structures, we talk about systemic issues and power structures and things of that nature. But something kind of paradoxical kind of started to emerge out of me thinking about this, and I was struggling with a little bit, is that I noticed that what I would consider the more left leaning side of the political spectrum, and you could cross this over. I guess you could probably cross this over more with the secular humanist or the atheistic kind of movements, or any of the groups that kind of loosely agglomerate that more left side of the spectrum of discourse. Talks, the rhetoric that comes out seems to always come from I won't say always, but seems to come very heavily from a place of fear of the other side holding power, wielding power, of the idea that the right wants to have all the power and wants to wield it all and use it to oppress everyone. And I was thinking about it, and then something about that didn't sit right with me. And then I started kind of piecing it together, and I was like, well, I've seen this data. I've seen data that has supported, and surveys that have supported, that most of our academic systems, the higher education, your professors, your administrations, all this are, and I don't think anybody would argue with this, are extremely heavily tilted to the left side of the spectrum. The policies, the prescriptions that come out of it are almost always fall on the left side. And I think I saw a number, and I'm not citing this as being, because it's something that it's coming out of memory, but it was something like 90 to 95% of professors donate to democratic causes and things of that nature. And then I remember, then I started thinking about the other structures that we have and the systems that we have. And so you could one of those big systems right now would be corporate media and big tech, which I think nobody would argue against the idea that big tech is probably the biggest guy in the room at this point. I mean, Google and Amazon are undoubtedly the two largest companies that anyone worldwide has to worry about or deal with. And I remember seeing a survey out of that as well that said that something like Google's employees and their company donations went to almost all Democratic causes. And I started kind of thinking about that. I'm like, so the systems that we consider academia, that we consider to be our systems, our structures based around knowledge, heavily lean to the left, and our big tech systems heavily lean to the left, at least as far as the rhetoric that they espouse and the causes that they push. But if you were to pay attention to the rhetoric that comes out, and we could also say that they hold all three branches of government at this point. The Democratic Party holds all three branches of government. So under that, it strikes me as a weird tone recently that as I pay attention to the media, it feels very uneasy, as if that besides the fact that they have all three branches of government, all of academia, big tech is all in the same sphere. I work in corporate America. Corporations are very much supportive of the Democratic causes at this point, with their money and their rhetoric. That if all of the knowledge base and all of the things that we consider to be our knowledgeable spheres of influence are controlled by the left, why is the rhetoric so often based around the idea of this being the coalition, the left side being the coalition of the oppressed, right? Because it strikes me that if it is the side in which controls our knowledge base in tech and in academia, and they had all the power because they have the knowledge. So where does the oppression idea come from, unless that paradoxical relationship is there? Is that an admission that these systems are not as knowledgeable as we would think they are, or is it an obfuscation of the truth, that the projection is that the power is on the other side when the power is actually on their side? And so I don't know. What do you guys think about that? It was just something that I couldn't wrap my mind around this power dynamic and how it works.
I find it very interesting, because what I get out of this is not only the question of power, what kind of power are we talking about here? But I mean, what kind of knowledge? That was the question I started with, but also what kind of power? Because, if you control the knowledge that is going on, that people are becoming familiar with, the things they are coming to know, if you control that and you have a certain agenda that you intend to accomplish through the power that you're wielding over this particular knowledge that you're insisting upon, then you're going to obtain a certain kind of results. And you could go as simple, I think, as power for good, power for bad. Power that empowers people to do better in their lives, or power to control them, put them in a position of servitude. So I mean, there's extremes either way. So I think the real question may be, who is controlling the knowledge because they have the power to. At least that's that. you know,
Yeah, I
what it
understand.
makes me think.
I understand completely.
Couple things come to mind, and I want to say one thing that's tactile and one thing that's a bit more ethereal. I'll start with the tactile one because that's more interesting. At least it could be more interesting. Steve and I were talking earlier today. I got a hold of he got a hold of me, and I answered with my telephone, which is it's a $30, and I don't mean to brag here. It's a $30 Walmart telephone. So I took my what
Ooh,
refer to as a POS version. But anyway, I took my $30 POS version, I plugged my earpiece in, and I went outside, and Steve took care of something with his dog, and I went outside and turned the water on because we're having a northern heat wave, and they can be pretty brutal. And we're having one right now, so I went out and watered a bit, and I showed Steve some stuff because we talked briefly about the garden, and I mentioned to him when we spoke last night. So the problem with gardening is that when you look at what I've got right now, and if you listen to the reasons that I give you, and if you've never gardened before, you'd look at it and go, well, why would anybody do anything else? But what you don't see is the 7-year-old kid that started with a packet of tomato seeds from the corner store 2 blocks away and some Dixie cups that rotted and dirt that I had in the yard. And that's where I started my gardening career. So that I end up here today, and it's the elegance. And I mentioned the idea of elegance being the scientific term, E equals MC squared, power and, well, not the power we're talking about, but the transposition of energy and matter in the universe is on that scale. Einstein gave us that elegant formula, which nobody really understood hardly at the time. And today, it's the underpinning for our understanding and all sorts of things. So to be able to take everything we've summed up, put it into an elegant form, and walk him out there and show him the trellis I put up this year, which last year, the summer I turned 64, I put a trellis up that collapsed on me in the winter. That's how I'm learning. This one won't. And you look at it and you go, wow, well, that's obvious, isn't it? Well, it wasn't obvious to me last year or any time from the time I was 7 until last year, but it's obvious to me today. So if I'm going to show somebody how to do something, I'm going to show them that. Well, here's what I risk. I risk him looking at me and going, well, of course you do that. That makes sense, especially after I explain it to him. And him going, well, you know what, why did it take you over 50 years to get there? Or almost 50. Why did it take you so long? That you could do that. So what I can do with that knowledge is hide it. I can obfuscate it. I can sell it. I can do all sorts of things with that knowledge to make it very difficult for it to be passed on, or I can share it openly at the risk that somebody else is going to come up with a better idea yet. And then I could borrow from their idea, and we'd both have a good idea. And we'd have a better idea than either of us had individually. That's the tactile version, because I want to segue really quickly into something that Jordan Peterson talks a lot about hierarchy. And he said, and it's to a naturalist like myself, if such a thing can actually exist, because that's what I am if I'm anything. I know a lot about plants and animals and the web of life, biomes, microsystems, macrosystems. I live in an incredible biome here, which only extends for a few acres, and it's gone. It's one of the last remnants of the big woods, which was what the country was like here before everyone screwed it up. And Peterson made this comment about hierarchy, says that he's known to talk about lobsters, that lobsters have the same systems in place and the same reward systems in place, which keeps them knowing where they stand in the order and still not killing each other. And he said goes back, this same system in lobsters is carried all the way up to us today. He says it's older than trees. And that one line there really gets me. It's older than trees. And you think, I mean, wrap your mind around that. This thing that we have in us, this natural inclination in us, is older than trees. And we still have it. And nature has selected for that through all the iterations it took to go from salamanders to us having this conversation here today. Nature has selected that because it works. And when we fight against that, when we try to dominate, we're fighting instead of recognizing hierarchies and compensating for each other and allowing each other to live in the same moment together, and for me to share something and somebody else to add something to what I share. We're literally fighting against our very breeding and being. And we're not going a direction that nature has suggested that we go since before there was even trees. I hope that I came through clearly enough on that, because to me it's so profound and it's so humbling, and yet it bears with us an inherent sense of responsibility that we don't stop here, that we don't start hiding our information in order to have control over another, that we still somehow maintain some openness. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, yeah, and I think that you hit on a lot of good points there, and the kind of the part about it that's fascinating me, because you and I, we could sit here all day, we can talk. I'm sure that we could sit for the rest of the night and talk about hierarchy. We could talk about, and I think that one of the more brilliant insights, it's because it's so fundamental, and I think that's what we're finding right now. I think we're in a moment in time where we're having to get back to learning the fundamentals, the things that our rapid rise in technology allowed us to forget, and we're having to kind of reincorporate that old knowledge and understand the reason why we can't just shave it off and leave it in the dustbin behind us. Or it's something that's integral to us. And one of the going back to this, and I hate to go back to the same well, but the idea, I mean, you can't even see without hierarchy. You look at something, and to focus on that one thing, you are prioritizing it out of all the other things within your visual range. And in order to do that, you are creating a hierarchy of attention right out of the get-go. I mean, you literally can't feel, you can't taste, you can't smell, you can't see without paying attention to a specific thing and picking it out and that in a metaphorical sense is rising it to the top of the hierarchy. It is you're bringing it to the pinnacle of the pyramid, so to speak. And I think that the reason that this kind of paradoxical, rhetorical question is interesting me is because we seem to be giving a lot of credence to the narrative that specifically and I don't mean to make this localized to, it's not really localized to the United States. We all have, every country throughout the world governs in some way in which there's a left of the spectrum party or a left of the spectrum coalition and a right of the spectrum coalition. It's not, we call them Democrats and Republicans here, but it's everywhere has their version, but it's all left, right, and that's the interesting thing to me is I don't think that most of us disagree on the facts that you would say that academia is held by the left and that big tech is run by the left. And so if Google has all of the data on everybody in the world, essentially everybody that uses the internet has their data is monopolized by Google. Well, that's the knowledge about us. And the most important parts of that, if you're talking about the knowledge about people, it's the little things. It's the metadata. It's our searches. It's because that's learning about our tendencies, about our behaviors, about our interest, about our intelligence, is the things that we're, so every time you talk to Siri and you ask a question, every time that you do a Google search, every time that you do anything like this, it is taking that data and funneling it up to Google, and they're using it to build it into algorithms towards predictive programming and artificial intelligences. And then, so that's the tech side. So they've got the knowledge about us. Academia is where all the knowledge about the world is housed, all the big all the greatest libraries, all the schools of science, all the schools of philosophy and art, and these are held within the academic institutes, and those are primarily across the board held by the left. So if it makes this old truism that we've heard self-defeating in some way, to say that knowledge is power. And I think fundamentally, to answer the question, I guess I never answered it from the beginning. I think that absolutely fundamentally knowledge is power, because first of all, I mean, like, even if you were to bring it to the physical realm, I could not get into physical shape if I did not know how to take care of my body, right? So even if you're talking about just physical fitness, you have to know how to do it before you can do it. And so the knowledge is in a fundamental sense. Now, whether or not, and I think that you brought up an interesting point, Daryl, earlier, talking about using it for good or evil, but before you get to that air, whether you use it for those, because the same, if I get strong, and big and tough, I can use that power to help people, or I could use that power to hurt people, but I have to build the power first, right? And I guess the point that I'm struggling with is how the rhetoric and how this narrative seems to be accepted, that the left side is the oppressed side. The left side is the side that is arguing that all of the systems that are in place are built to oppress groups that are inherently within their coalition, whether it be racial minorities, whether it be the sexes or genders or whatever the case may be, but all of these are part of the coalition of the left. And if knowledge is power and you control all of the knowledge, then how can you claim to not have the power? And that's the issue that I'm really struggling with, and I don't understand how this is not something, how this is a narrative that is sellable.
Well, here's a question I have about what you're saying. When you and let's just take the term itself, knowledge is power. If we don't define knowledge, and be very strict with it, then it could be assumed knowledge. It could be pretend knowledge. Let's go fake knowledge. And so if you take this knowledge that certain people are oppressed just because you say they are, and you can be convincing with it, then there you go. That's the power as a result of the knowledge you've got. And when I hear, one of the sickest things I hear these days is people apologizing for the color of their skin and things of that nature. That may be knowledge. If someone thinks that I've done something wrong by having a certain color of skin, and I'm not even going to be specific here, because it could be any color that is, or maybe every color. We're wrong for being born this way. But that's knowledge. But is it true knowledge? And so, to me, that's where we are. And to what Terry was saying, what I'm afraid of is the very thing he was talking about is being destroyed by this kind of knowledge, this kind of so-called knowledge, because people are at their best when they can express the very things that, it's like Terry talking about, his, from the early days, he wanted to acquire as much as he could. And I've heard him talk plenty about what he's done in his life. And there's so many things he's done that it's a shame there's not a wall behind him with awards saying, this guy has done a lot of really great things. But I think it's really because of this, so-called knowledge, and the lack of true knowledge, because I think the only reason people can get away with this is because, and I hate to use the term, but as a people, I think we've been dumbed down. And a lot of that does have to do with the social media. You don't have to, and I never was any good at this, but I know I'm talking to a couple of guys that are good at it, and that is research, digging into something to learn about it. But you don't have to do that anymore. Just ask Siri. She'll give you that instant answer, and you'll have learned one little possibility. It may not even be true. Who declared her God? Everything that she knows is right.
Well, now,
let me just say this. I do a little bit different things, that most people do. We ask Siri what the population of Franklin, Texas is. Well, we've spent a night or two in Franklin. It's a little town a couple of hours from here in Texas. It's the county seat. There's over 1,000 people there. But Siri doesn't know that. When we ask her, what is the population of Franklin, Texas? She says, the population of El Paso, Texas, and gives the population of El Paso, Texas, which is in Franklin County. So she's a bit confused. And, I wonder how often that happens and people don't know it. But,
Well, you brought up an insightful, and I'm sorry, Terry, I just don't want to forget this. But you brought up an insightful point there that I think is important, and I remember, and I don't want to misplace it. I think that this was an Aristotle. I think that this was a concern that was brought up in regards to, but it was when people first started writing. When we first started writing, philosophers of the time were decrying it, saying that because it was exactly what you just said, that by writing things down, it took the burden off of your memory to have to hold that information. And so it made it so that we could, it did two things. It made it so that we could preserve the information, but it also made it so that you no longer had to focus on remembering it. And it's essentially the idea that every tool that we create makes us fundamentally a little bit weaker, because it makes our lives a little bit easier. So we do not have to develop as much in order to continue to maintain. But the interesting kind of point that you can take apart from that, and this was a little story that I was telling Terry about earlier, was, and it goes kind of to what you were saying too, is Terry, is that my dad told me the story my entire life of he was a gearhead when he was a teenager and growing up, but he was a gearhead, meaning he just had a sports car and worked on it. Right. He didn't, back then they didn't have the internet. Of course, he couldn't Google, pull up a YouTube video to show him how to DIY his, Stingray Corvette engine or whatever. He went and just opened the hood and just started tinkering around and figuring out how things worked, and used his brain to figure out how his car worked, and then he would work on it whenever it would have a problem, and he would figure out something was going on. He'd pop the trunk and start working on it himself, and he learned and he knew. And then, by the time that he was 18, 19 years old, he could fix his car, any problem that was going on with it, well, aside from transmission blowing up or something where you could, but I mean, or having to rebuild the engine, but any of your normal maintenance, anything that you had to do to the car, souping it up, he could put a new muffler on it, or he could whatever he wanted to do to make it better so that it would impress the girls more. But he did it just by working on it and learning it. And he tells the story is that my mother's brother, my uncle, is that he knew, he was also a gearhead. He knew everything there was to know about sports cars. But he knew the Motor Trend magazine, Car and Driver magazine version of everything about the cars. So he would be sitting out there, and he would stand out there while my dad was up under the car, working away at it. And he would be talking to my dad about it. Oh man, this has got a 350 or 350 cubic centimeter, it just got this many horsepower, whatever the case may be. But he would knock off every stat about the car, everything that you could possibly say about the car, about the engine, about the wheels, about how everything, like he knew all the statistics and everything about the car itself. But then my dad was up under the car one time, and he called out there and said, hey, can you hand me that? Can you hand me my socket, or my ratchet and this size socket, whatever the socket was, the impact socket was he needed. He said, can you hand me that? And what do you mean? I have no idea what you mean. What are you talking about? He was like, hey, this my ratchet, my socket over there. I need to do this. And then he would come up there, or else they would be up under the hood, and he would say, hey, can you reach over there and or pull the spark, or pull the wire off the spark plug or whatever. And my uncle had no idea what he was talking about. So he knew all the facts about the car out of a book, but he knew nothing about the car, how to do anything with the car other than drive it. He could get in and drive it, but he knew nothing about how to fix anything, or about how to do anything with the car, take it apart, put it together, anything like that. And so there's a practical knowledge, and then there's a book, a book knowledge, or whatever, however you would want to term it. And so, this all goes back to the idea. It's just, there are different kinds of knowledge, and there's knowledge that's more consequential than, there's types of knowledge that are more consequential than other types of knowledge. And so to me, it begs the question as to whether or not, and this goes back once again, we talked about this before with behaviors or acting. If the knowledge inside of your head is knowledge at all, if you don't put it into practice in the world, right? I mean, you could be the smartest guy in the world, and if you just sit on your couch all day eating Cheetos and playing Modern Warfare, you're not using that knowledge in any given way. So do you really have it, so to speak? Is that knowledge really power still? And so I guess I'm just kind of rambling a little bit on that point, but I guess it just makes me wonder whether or not either the power is actually there on that side and they have the real knowledge, or if these systems and these institutions of knowledge, the way that they're currently formulated, aren't actually institutions of knowledge the way that we want to believe. Because if it's not practical knowledge, then is it really powerful at all?
Well, to your point, it's kind of scary if you think about it, because you mentioned the left being basically in charge or having control over universities. I mean, this has been going on for quite some time, and we have this introduction of critical race theory, and everything is race based, and gender and things that are questionable at best. Are they? And my question is, are they replacing the things that people pharmacists, you know, pilots, engineers, are they still learning everything they need to know to function in the capacity that they will get their degree and find their occupation in? Or are they sacrificing a lot of that? I mean, to me, it's kind of scary to think about that. You know, where is this current knowledge actually taking people? What's it doing? What's it going to? What are the effects going to be in the long term?
I'd like to say something else, but to what you just mentioned, Daryl, I think I said something a couple of weeks back here when I just devastated my shoulder about 5.5 years ago, and they had to go rebuild it, and just the road to getting to the point where I could make it to the hospital for the surgery took 2.5 months because it was so messed up. I had to lose the blood and junk in there, and on the way there through the scans that were taken, the doctor that I was seeing, who was about my age and very experienced, said, "This is beyond me." And you don't want to hear when they're going to rebuild your shoulder that the guy goes, "Well, this is more than I know how to fix." And he went, "Well, I knew it was screwed up, but I was a little worried." But he knew somebody else who'd done that before, and interestingly enough, was younger than him. So, and that's why I said that I can do this today is amazing, because I couldn't do that with help. I mean, I couldn't do that holding my other hand until about a year ago. So that I can do it alone is fantastic, and it's only because the right guy got to me. Because the guy who probably, in his I want to be an orthopedic surgeon test, he probably knocked the ball right, almost out of the park, maybe just over the fence. He was probably getting good 87% in his test or something like that. Turned out he needed probably 95% to do that operation. So what you're saying is, I was glad that he knew that he didn't know how to do it, and he knew to hand it off to somebody who did. And that's fantastic. I mean, and especially because I like being able to touch my left ear with my right hand over the top of my head. And I didn't realize how much I liked that until I couldn't do it. But the other thing too is that very thing, slightly different, shift the gear just a little bit here, is that if we, and this is where society is going, without question. I look at the hills that people like Jordan Peterson chose, who you wouldn't know if he didn't choose to die on this hill. He just said, here's the deal. Nature has given us male and female with the occasional whatever thrown in there that didn't quite work out, and that's how it is. And if you want to identify yourself by some other thing, cool. But, don't force me to do it. And he got in so much trouble that he became popular because he said that. Brett Weinstein got run out of the university that he was in because he's a biologist. And he went, I've been flipping animals over and looking at their undersides for years, and it's all I've seen. But so essential of a biological fact as that has come under such assault, and we're being asked to recognize this panoply of genders, and decisions and whatever. And you go, and I've done that in the barnyard myself. I flipped over. By the way, you never want to flip over a large goose to tell what sex it is, because it will beat you senseless with their wings. Learned that one the hard way. But anyway, little tips from the farmyard. But an Emden goose will beat you out. They don't hit you hard enough to really take you out, but they hit you often enough in the matter of a couple of seconds that you don't even know what happened to you. But the thing is that with aberrations, yes. The black swan fallacy type thing. Yeah, every now and then something just doesn't quite work out. But, Minnesota here by Jordan, not far from me, was where they learned that pollutants in the water were giving frogs extra legs. So, yeah, frogs have 4 legs unless they were by Jordan, Minnesota, in which case, until they finally, crack down on the pollution in the Minnesota River, and then frogs went back to having 4 legs again. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we recognize, well, frogs may have 4 or 5 legs, and it was an aberration, and it was recognized as an aberration, not as a normalized thing. And I don't want to beat that horse too hard, but that's the easiest one. It's the sort of thing that you go, if you can't accept that, we're going to have a problem. If you teach it as a fact, we have a really big problem, because now you're teaching as truth and as fact something that is not truthful and is not factual. If you require people learn things that aren't truthful or factual, then the knowledge, and that's in quotes, the knowledge that's now contained in the people that are absorbing that knowledge is not true any longer. It doesn't take away all the feelings that people might have about things. Set that over here. The actual knowledge is what it is. But we do that in so many different areas. We can only do that so much, and this is way too big of a subject to crack open near the end of a show. That's something that Steve and I have been talking about in writing and in person now for at least a couple of years. I'm going to say it in a word. Greta, how dare you? Greta believes or says that the minor climatic shifts that are happening in the world today are a huge aberration to how the earth is, and that we've caused certain things. Well, we have caused certain things. We don't need to take plastic and throw it in the oceans. We don't need to cut down trees. We can actually replant trees by the billions and turn deserts. We know how to do this. We can turn deserts into rainforests. Not overnight, but not in a few decades. By the time Greta's my age, we can turn some of the desert areas, which are useless to people and animals, we can turn them back into not only productive areas, productive meaning that they're absorbing CO2 and emitting oxygen, but they also become a habitat for animals. We can regreen the world. We didn't know that we could do that 50 years ago. Today we know how to do that. We have the knowledge in front of us to do that. But there's something about that knowledge that it's important to understand that to have the impetus and the cause to take that step does not require the threat from a girl in Scandinavia. It requires actual knowledge about what we're capable of doing, about the moral obligation of the human race, because we are the only animal that can F up the world or fix it. We could F it up and the F could turn into fix from the other F. We have the ability to do that. That's fantastic. When I was a kid, we didn't know that we could fix it. We just knew that we could screw it up. And we did a lot of that when I was a kid. LA was in a blanket of smog, and we're destroying things. And now we know that we can fix it, but we can't go ahead and fix it for the wrong reasons. We can, but we should not go ahead based on the lie. We should go ahead based on the truth. And one of the great truths that we're hesitant to take in here, and I'm going to just ricochet off of it because Dr. Jones said go ahead, and I'd like to just go a little ways with this. People who are not considered popular in the realms of science have been coming up with scientific discoveries, which science doesn't seem to want to deal with because they don't concur with the philosophy of existent science. Among those are the major events that shape the Earth. The last ice age coming in and the last ice age going out. Both of them seem to be geologically and by observation seem to have been created by singular events. And for those that don't know this, I'll just mention this because I think it's fascinating. Randall Carlson is very key in this, talking about this, and he's fascinating, worth looking up and worth listening to everything the man's ever said. But they found mammoths with flowers. And you gotta understand, flowers don't just grow on plants in the tundra. Flowers grow in a very specific optimal time. The flowers here in my woods are fading right now, for instance. They're done. The mammoths had flowers in their bellies when they were frozen solid, knocked back on its haunches and its legs broken, like it had a rock drop. I mean, the world dropped on it. The Ice Age came so fast that not only were the plants eradicated, not only were the megafauna like mammoths killed, but they were frozen solid fast enough that they didn't spoil. That's an event. That the Ice Age came as an event, and the Ice Age left as an event. And I live in a really cool state because whatever the event was that appears to be a strike or strikes on the world, but a strike in North America, Ontario, you had a mile of ice, and then all of a sudden the ice was gone, and that ice scraped everything off the Laurentian Shield, scooped Lake Superior out. A fifth of the fresh water on Earth sits in a hole that was full of basalt, that was a wound in the earth that was healed by the basalt that gushed up and sealed it. Scooped the basalt out of Lake Superior, made 15,000 lakes and Lord knows how many gravel pits in Minnesota. And it fizzled out. When it got it right to about where I am, the bulk of that was gone. But in the process of the erosion from that, not only did it scrape out Lake Superior, it created the St. Croix Valley, it created the Mississippi River Valley, it created the Minnesota River Valley and the Red River Valley, which are much more significant than people realize. That was probably the main drainage. And that's all the way on the South Dakota border, North Dakota border. And interestingly enough, by the way, the flowage is such that it's going to be a memory test and I'm going to fail. There's a lake, an elongated lake, and I've been there, which really bothers me. I fished it. But on the South Dakota border, where the Red River flows north to the Arctic Ocean, and the Minnesota River flows south to to its convergence with the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's right there. It's not even a high point, but that's the geology is that critical. And most of the gush and the angular thing that you see from Lake Superior, if you look at the angle of Lake Superior and you see this event, and it just blew all this huge geologic event, catastrophic beyond measure. Well, what else would that have done? It would have caused the oceans to rise, right? What does that suggest? Humanity's had 1,300 years to settle along the seashore, right? We don't have the internet. We don't even have telephones. We don't even have coconuts to bang together. Everyone's down by the ocean, having a good day, and all of a sudden the ocean goes up. What do you have? You have extinction events, or minor extinction events. You have the things that inspire stories like Noah's Ark and the other flood myths that the world had retained through oral traditions. All this ties together, and it's this web of this fascinating web that real facts start fitting into. And you go, why is there such suppression of this information? Because this information is eventually it's going to be commonplace, but right now that information does one thing. It takes all the wind out of Greta. It's no longer a thing. You can quit fretting and fix the damn world. You can quit, pandering to a teenager demanding something. And then we can just fix the world. We can quit polluting the oceans. We can reforest the deserts. We can do stuff right. That's what information and knowledge can do. And that's what the repression of information and knowledge can retard. I find it not only pertinent to our times, critically important that we apprehend this stuff, and learn what to do with it. You know, Steve's a few years behind me in time. It would be cool if the world made a lot more sense because we handled information right by the time you got to my age. It would be so rewarding, and it would be for you too. I mean, can you imagine looking back and realizing that, you know, that 2000, let's just say 20 something, was the year that we finally decided to quit lying to ourselves and do stuff right for the sake of the planet, actually for the sake of the future, actually for the sake of your children, not for some political agenda that has nothing to do with anything other than totalitarian control, but actually for the planet. You know, what a fascinating opportunity we have in front of us. And opportunity is not real. It's unrealized potential, and it only exists in the minds of people that recognize it and move ahead in it. And I'm starting to preach, but I find this so fascinating and so phenomenally important. And I hope I haven't been too long-winded in the process here.
Let me say this. We need guys like you behind the pulpit, because what comes to my mind is two different scenarios. One, I stood by for a number of years, and I really, to be honest about it, place no credibility in it whatsoever anymore. And that is, you know, that there's going to be this God that's going to pour out wrath and going to bring all kinds of destruction. I mean, you know, the future is sealed. We know that the world is on a crash course schedule. And this is according to what preachers, certain preachers, maybe not so many anymore, I don't know, but it's what your Bible says, you know, that these end times are going to come, and the world's going to be destroyed a certain way, and then there's going to be new heavens and new earth, which would be nice, but you know, that's the destruction of this one's got to happen first. And if you're a true Christian and you truly believe, what's the point in trying to save anything? Should be the natural response. Well, more recently, aside from that, you know, I have heard, and I think I know the source, but maybe I do, maybe I don't. I've just heard it said that if things don't change, we have 12 years to get it right, or you know, this whole thing is yeah, right, we're done. And I'm thinking, okay, 12 years. It's obvious we can't do it in 12 years. There's no way, you know, we can't quit driving cars and shut down all our power sources and all this kind of stuff and transition everything to where we can still function in that short of time. So what's the point? Why do anything? But on the other hand, I see something going on here. To be honest, I don't know a lot about it, but I see a harvesting of trees. And with it, once the harvest comes in, they replant just like you would a garden or you know, any other crop. And you know, we're surrounded by forest here, but it's something that is taken care of. Many times especially during, well, I don't know, I think it kind of goes on year round to some degree. I see a lot of smoke in any particular direction. And if your first thought is, you know, what's burning, then usually it's a controlled burn. They're taking care of these forests. They're keeping the undergrowth down. So if we get a drought, you know, it's manageable. And it also, I would suppose, gives the trees more room to grow. And so it's just, to me, it's just evidence of the fact that what you're saying, Terry, is doable. You know, they do it here in this part of the country. I don't know that it goes on everywhere, but I see it as a wonderful thing. If they just cut all the trees down and that was it, we would be a desert here. You know?
Just quickly, what you're saying,
Yeah.
it was hotly contested in California as to whether it was poor forest management or Greta's prophecy coming true. It was poor forest management.
Well,
Yep.
I thought, you know, I thought that I'd try to tie this all the way back around using that point, because I think, you know, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I have thought, and just, you know, I at one point I was a meteorologist. That's what I did in the Air Force, and so I know a little bit about weather, and it's always struck me a little. This whole conversation has always struck me a little as low resolution, because I know more about the systems that produce weather, and I know that the first argument you always hear whenever you bring this up is weather is not climate. Yeah, I get that. I know, I understand that, but you have to understand weather to understand climate, because it is in form and function. They work off of the same processes and the same forces. But one of the things that I began to think about with it is it's always kind of sat strange with me, because I've looked at the proposals and I've looked at the measures that they're talking about using to combat these issues, and the measures largely seem to be what you're talking about: cutting back on emissions, which is essentially stop using energy, and to raise taxes, carbon credits, things of that nature, in order to bring more money into the governmental bodies to be able to tackle climate change issues. And I hear all these things about climate change issues, but I don't hear anybody talking about what to do about a meteor the size of Texas coming towards the Earth in 12 years. So even if we did, and that's the thing, it strikes me as the pinnacle of irony, that what we would do is that we would go and we would put all this effort into doing those measures and lower our production and our productive output, because you have to use energy in order to make productive output. And so if we lowered our energy use, then we would be necessarily lowering our productive output. We would also be cutting back on innovation, because as you centralize these ideas into singular bodies, when they're going to be investing in projects in order to tackle these issues, yes, you pull together more money and you can put those larger amounts of money towards those projects. But if you put the money behind the guy with the bad idea, and there was just some Joe Schmo out in the populace somewhere that never got found, because you've killed off any opportunity for him to maximize his potential through the idea of self-improvement or self-gain, you know, in a system that allows you to use your talents in order to make your own life better, or to get your ideas out there and produce them. That it would be justice in that sense for us, if that were to happen, for us to put all of that effort into doing that and lower those productive outputs, and then for a meteor to come through and just end it all. Because, you know, as we lowered the temperature prior to the ice age that would be impending, and we lowered the degree, you know, half a degree Celsius prior to that. But the more interesting, or I shouldn't say more, but the aspect about it is, I noticed that in none of those proposals, none of them talk about that threat. And we know, you know, nobody disputes the idea that a meteor struck off the Yucatan Peninsula. That's the one they say killed off the dinosaurs. And now that we've got all this evidence coming in of the meteor strikes that they have, through, I don't remember what it was, sonic resonance, or I can't remember what it was, but they've looked through the ice on Greenland, and they've found the massive crater there, which is what they are talking about with the Younger Dryas event, which is what Terry was alluding to earlier. The ice age.
30 seconds tops there, buddy. The coolest thing about that is the melting of the ice in Greenland has allowed us to see that it was an event.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about your irony, you know, but
yeah.
You know,
but you know, so I you know, it would be a kind of cosmic justice for us to take and lower the productive output of the entire world drastically in order to cut carbon emissions. just for us to have a meteor come through in 15 years and just end it all. And because the only way, I mean, it just strikes me as obvious that our technological capabilities, especially our space platforms, the things that we're doing in space, we do not have anything capable of dealing with meteor threats to the Earth out in space right now, but we could get there. We see the advancements that have been made through SpaceX, through NASA. We see the advancements of all of these things. We're working very rapidly towards for useful forms of artificial intelligence. We've got all kinds of. We're developing new fuels. We're finding new ways to do things, and I don't have any problem with finding alternative fuels. I mean, that's
Sure.
another one of the oil was an alternative fuel at one point, but at one point it was just this black nasty crap all over the place that we didn't have any purpose for, and you didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't an energy source until we figured out how to make it into one, how we figured out how to use it. And so the point being is that I'm sure that there are plenty of things left on this planet that we can derive energy from, that would allow us to get out of that framework. But that's all getting beside the point. The idea is that the only way that we're going to make the technology strong enough to be able to defend ourselves against something like a meteor coming towards the Earth is to continue to develop, continue to grow, continue to advance. And the only way to do that is to continue to utilize the energy that we have at our fingertips, and continue to learn and continue to put our knowledge into practice through that energy in order to make new and better things, in order to make the world a better place, make humanity better. And it just strikes me as sad. I mean, it was sad more so than anything else, that this is the level of discourse that we're having. But all that, kind of bring that all back around to the point, is knowledge is power, but it's also what you make of it. And we could have all the knowledge in the world, and we could have useless knowledge, and we could have knowledge that is extremely useful. But if we divert all of our attention toward the useless knowledge, then we're not it's a misallocation of resources. But back to the original point regarding the paradox, I just think that someone has to explain to me that it seems to me that you either have to give up one. You either have the knowledge or you have the power. So you either have to admit that maybe the guys on the right side know more than you, or you're not as oppressed as you think you are.
Well, one of the key things that I would say here is, if the thing that we need to really pay attention to and fight for, if I can use that term, is the type of humanity, because like you said, we won't restrict it to this country, even though I think this country's had an edge in the world for a number of years in this area. But a society that incentivizes and encourages the advancement, of the knowledge that men possess, and that they thrive on, you might say, the advancement, the encouragement of it, rather than the punishment and the suppression of it. And to me, that's where your future lies. That's where the future of humanity lies. Wow.
Did we want to? I saw Dr. Jones jump on. Do we want to wrap up there, or we can?
I think we have enough momentum here, and we've coasted to a good spot. But I don't have much to add, other than I loved learning my whole life, and there's one of the things that's the most frustrating to me in social media, And if anyone seeing my wall in the last couple of days probably recognizes that, is I put something out there that I thought was interesting. I was just being trying to be amusing. It was the people. I'm sorry if this is sensitive to somebody. I apologize for hurting your feelings. But it was the Guatemalan, the people in Guatemala holding up a sign saying Trump won, to Kamala Harris when she got off the plane. I thought, I'm sorry, that's funny, Yeah, you might have your boot on our neck, but we still can laugh, until you shoot it through our head. We can still laugh. And then somebody asked me what I felt about the election, and I thought, I don't want to tell you what I feel. Not because my feelings are so precious to me. It's because they don't mean a goddamn thing. And I know it. My feelings don't mean anything. They're irrelevant. And Ben Shapiro has summed it up in a quick phrase. Facts don't care about your feelings, which, depending on how many feelings you have, may hurt your feelings. But the facts don't care about your feelings. It's sort of, it's just, we have to grow the bleep up and go, how about we just talk about what actually is instead of about how I feel? Because I don't really feel much of anything about it, actually, which is the answer to that question is I don't really feel much of anything about it. I just thought it was, as I actually answered, I just thought it was really funny. I don't think it's really funny, But that's because I have a sick sense of humor, which has allowed me to survive some really bad times. But
it's not so sick. It's not so sick.
but
Don't be so hard on yourself.
But we just have we've got all this aggregation of information and talent and skill, and all we have to do is just quit lying to ourselves, for the convenience of others who will be offended no matter what, because they're professionals at being offended. So maybe we just quit worrying about the feelings and talk about what is. And and we can, my God, we can green the deserts, and we know it. We've proved it. Now all we have to do is go, there's something to do. There's a way to employ people. We can green the deserts. We grew up, all of us grew up being told the Sahara was expanding and the world was turning into a wasteland. And it turns out the Sahara is shrinking and the world's redeemable. And we as gardeners of the world can go out there and re-green the deserts. I don't think I can say it enough times because it's so fascinating to me. It's so fantastic that we have that ability. And all we have to do is embrace it and quit lying to ourselves for the sake of someone who wants to talk about the virtual cult of gradualism, which has stifled science because the world has not moved ahead through gradualism. It's moved ahead through fits and starts. We were talking earlier, and all I could think of when we were talking, I didn't bring it up to you, Steve, but that there's a hymn that says, "I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise." I go, that's it, right there. I talked about the Bighorn Mountains and the upthrust in the middle of the continent, and people kind of conflate it with the Rockies, but the Rockies is further over. You look at these things that just happened. The scooping out of Lake Superior, all these huge climatic and geological events, and if we could get it wrap our mind around that, we could maybe be ready for the next cataclysm, because it's a coming. We don't know what it is, but it's coming. If the people in Noah's time had known, there might have been more boats. Maybe people would be keeping their llamas in a little shack on the boat just in case. But and I say that jokingly, but the other thing is, what fascinates me is that it's also contained in that is the value of mythology, the truth inside of myth, that someone cared enough to bury in the myth so that we wouldn't lose it. so that we could remember that sometimes really hinky shit happens, and maybe we want to have a boat or an airplane or a boat that's an airplane, or maybe we want to have enough rice to last for a week or a year. Maybe we want to be ready for big things to happen, so when big things happen, they're just inconveniences. But we're not, as long as we live so hand to mouth and so destitute of facts, I don't think we're ever going to be ready for anything. And there's a group of people that doesn't care, and they concern me the most. The ones who know that they'll always wrest power because they see power as a tool to subjugate the masses, and that's not what hierarchy is about. Hierarchy is about making sure that everybody wins, that everyone's in a boat when the time comes, and speaking metaphorically. I'll leave it at that. But thanks again. A great opportunity to talk about this stuff, and it's I think it's such an encouraging subject, in spite of the fact that it's such a discouraging situation we find ourselves in.
Well, I hate, because that was a great place to end this, but I did want to bring up one little thing that you made me think of when you brought up the Noah thing a minute ago, and it was something you had talked about earlier, and I think this is interesting, is the Noah story. When people talk about, that you take and you factor in the math about the dimensions of the boat and everything, and you can derive off of that they couldn't have possibly put all of the animals in the planet into the boat. And that's a fine and valid criticism of the story. I absolutely. But what is left out of that question is why and how were the dimension, because they've built, I don't know if you guys know this or not, or if you've ever seen it, they built a replica based on the dimensions written in the Bible, built a replica of the ark. It's in Tennessee, a life-size replica of the ark, and it is massive. I mean, this thing is enormous, and they still use the basic framework of it, the dimension size, the way that it's constructed, aside from the fact that it's wood and not metal, but the dimensions and everything are the same thing. That Ever Given that was blocking the Suez Canal a while back, those super tankers are the same dimension. So tell me, because so you answered a great question. Yes, you couldn't have fit all the animals into that boat. Sure, fine. But why are the dimensions to a boat like that in a book that's that old, from a story that's derived from oral tradition that is that old in the first place? Like, oh my, like, does nobody have a question about before the Roman navies and before any of the advances in these advances in naval warfare, that there were dimensions of a boat like that in a book that old? It's just interesting. It's interesting. Talk about knowledge. That's weird knowledge to have just derived out of the primitive mind and just have there for no reason. But
That's good stuff.
If I can share a thought or two on knowledge is power. I've been listening to you guys, really enjoying what you guys have to say tonight. And I'm sitting here in my living room, and perhaps you can hear my cats. Some of them are wanting to breed, and so they make funny noises. But I'm also sitting next to my mother. I got to thinking, as you guys were sharing X, Y, and Z about natural selection, and how people are just saying, let's make up some new stuff and let's move away from this commitment that we have to the process of science. And boy, I tell you what, you guys made some wonderful points there. But here's the point that I want to make. I'm sitting here next to my mother, and she has dementia. And feeding her or giving her a plate of food to eat, and she has this cup coffee cup just to drink out of, and she's putting the food in the drink and the drink and the food and going back and forth because it's what dementia does to patients. And I'm looking forward to the day in which people have the kind of knowledge and the power to change all of this for, let's say, mothers like my mother, and give them a much better life. So, we lost our son just a handful of days ago, our youngest son, and it devastated us. And if there had been, that is, people more in the know, that wouldn't have happened. And so I'm on the side of continuing down the pathway where we can increase our knowledge, if that makes sense. And I think that you guys are very, very pro-science, and I thank you guys for sharing your thoughts tonight. Very, very good thoughts, and you guys blessed me a lot. But I'm looking at my mother, and she's such a wonderful person, but it hurt me because I lack the knowledge of being able to deal, that is, being able to change her at this time to where she can do things to where it would work closer to the norm. If that makes sense. But I would hope that there would be a day in which someone discovered a way to put maybe an end to dementia, an end to much of the suffering that human beings go through. So if you have knowledge, if you have a great amount of knowledge, you do have power to change people's lives for the better. And on the other side of the coin, some people have a lot of knowledge and they use it for negative purposes. Maybe we can talk about that someday, but thank you guys for your time. We're going to get out of here, and thank all of you guys for sharing your prayers and your care and all of that. Listening to my cats in the background, you know what they're after and wanting to do. And so thanks for being